We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And if we get to one of the questions a little bit farther down in the list, not sure if we will, depending on time, but if we do, this might end up being the most controversial episode of AVRant ever. Little tease for the future, if not this week, then next week.
More controversial than me saying that center channels are pointless and
yes, indeed.
Surround back suck?
Yes, indeed. I might be just inviting a flame war, but yep,
it's okay.
We'll get to it.
That's okay. I just read the article where I said in order to have a home theater, all you need is 3 speakers.
Left, right, and sub.
No, unfortunately, that wasn't it. No,
that would be.
That's what I would. That for myself.
Yeah,
that's what
that'd
would
be the 3 speakers you need.
No. You'll just have to wait till it comes out and find out.
Another tease.
Oh, actually, I think it might be actually up on the website right now. I can't remember if I published it or not. Yes, I did say there were 3 speakers for the home cinema experience. Okay. That's what I said. Well, got to find out. avgadgets.com. Go look for an article from Tom.
Center, rear center, and voice of God. There, that's your 3.
There you go.
A
you
line straight overhead.
Overhead, that's right. There's no stereo separation whatsoever. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to avrant.com, leave us a comment, facebook.com/avrantpodcast, youtube.podcast, because I'm British.
I don't know if that's British.
Not sure what that, I don't know what accent that was. It's just kind of podcast.
Yes.
The podcast. Maybe I'm channeling my inner James Earl Jones. YouTube.com/AVRant. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom @avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. If you have been looking for a Tom at tomandrew.com to work, it didn't for like a month because I accidentally let the URL expire.
Oh, okay.
I don't know where the URL, where the announcements for that were going, but I didn't. They expired, and then I had to pay to reinstate it, and then pay to. I overpaid. I paid as much to get tomandrew.com back online for a year as I did to update, because AVRant was about to expire too, with no notifications from anybody, for 5. Right. So, you can't just buy Infinity anymore. You used to be able to buy Infinity.
Inflation.
Like, I own this. Yeah. All right, we want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. If you want to do that financially, you can go to the avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which will take you to a PayPal donation interface, site, JavaScript thing. I don't know.
Website.
Anyways, they'll take some money from your PayPal or your credit card and send most of it to us. So we want to thank Kevin for doing that this week. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Yes, for sure. Kevin, thank you very much for that PayPal donation. It is appreciated. There was like some stuff that came in on Monday. So once again, I'll just give out the disclaimer that everything that comes in after Sunday goes on the following week's podcast, not this week's. So
That's right.
If you don't hear your name right now, but the stuff that was done was on Monday, next week you shall be mentioned.
Yeah. And it's Sunday Canadian time, in case you're wondering.
Yes.
It's Canadian time.
So different from
Slightly
Florida
different.
time.
So different from American time. In America, we keep time totally different down here.
I mean, we do have Newfoundland time. Nobody else has that.
Well, Adelaide is a half an hour. The South Australia is a half an hour in front of, like, or behind the rest of Australia, which is totally bizarre. All right. The other way you can support us financially is going to patreon.com/AVRantPodcast and signing up there to be a contributing supporter of our podcast. Every month, they'll take some money from you and give it to us, most of it at least, to us. We want to thank our 124 patrons at patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Indeed, patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who would like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. You know what? I didn't even check, so that's gone up. It's 126 as we're recording this. I forgot to check that number. So
I was just about to make a comment about I like it to be a nice even 125, but I'm no longer feel that way for some reason.
126, even better. So yeah, there we go. That's
fine.
That's very nice. And yes, thank you to everyone who is a patron of the podcast.
There we go. All right, if you can't support us financially, we understand. Or if you don't want to, we also understand. That's because I'm often that way. So support us in some other way and let us know what you did so we can mention you. So Infinite Gary let Monoprice know that our recommendation led to his purchase of what?
Well, that's coming up later. I want to tease it. So
Pre-pros? Yeah, okay. Dale told Video SECU that we recommended their speaker stands. And Mario sent photos to me with permission to use them on AV gadgets. Again, I will or will not use them at my whim, and some of them will get used more than once, and some of them won't get used at all. It's just kind of the way. It's just kind of, you know, what I do is I dump them all at like anything I think that might be useful someday. Like somebody sent me a picture of a riser in progress. I'm like, I totally could have used this a couple of months ago when I wrote that riser article. I might go back and insert it into it. But I probably won't. But I might. So who knows? But I label them with your name and then something I think I'll use to search them, search for them, and then throw them into the back of the end of the website. And then when I'm looking for a thing, I'll search for it. Hopefully it'll show up. So Mario, thank you very much. Dale, thank you as well. And Infinite
yes,
Gary.
That's right. Infinite Gary, thanks for talking us up to Monoprice. Dale, thanks for talking us up to Video SECU. And Mario, thank you for giving Tom permission to use your photos in perpetuity on avgadgets.com.
There you go. We got this some news here from our listeners. Some of them from our listeners. Some of them just, I guess, came up because we
these were both from listeners this week.
All right, I can scroll down long enough to see if there's anything that's just from us. All right, Carl. This is from Carl. Spotify announced Spotify Hi-Fi, a new lossless streaming tier that will launch in select markets later this year, i.e. big cities where high-speed internet exists. It will be CD quality in an undisclosed lossless audio format. They say having a lossless option has been one of their most requested features by users, and they intend to make it accessible through Spotify Connect, although it might require firmware updates for their hardware partners or from their hardware partners. No price given yet. For comparison, Tidal Hi-Fi is $20 a month, Amazon Music Hi-Fi or HD is $15 a month, or $13 a month if you have Prime, and there's literally no force on earth that will allow me to sign up for any other streaming service, because we were talking with some people over the weekend and I listed all the streaming services we had, and my wife's was like, really? We have all those? I'm like, you watch them. You're there. You watch them with us. I mean, it's like, that seems like a lot.
You're already a Prime subscriber, so Amazon Music HD, not a terrible deal if you're going that way. Honestly, I don't think it's necessary. I think 320 kilobit per second lossy is indistinguishable to my human ears from actual lossless. But nonetheless, other people have other services have used it and marketed it, and apparently people have now requested it. So mission accomplished on their part for having marketed it that way and convinced people that they will hear a difference, whether or not they truly will. And there you go. That's fine. Everybody go lossless. That's great. We're finally back to CDs.
It took us about 10 years. This comes from our listener John. Zack Snyder's Justice League will stream on HBO Max in 1.37 to 1 aspect ratio. If I wasn't already not excited about this movie, which I already am not excited about this movie, I am even less excited about this movie than I was before. I read this before too, and I was like, there are very few true auteurs when it comes to anything, and I really like Zack Snyder's directing style. I love 300. I really liked Sucker Punch quite a bit. His Watchmen was fine.
The opening was excellent.
Right, that opening was very good, and then the rest of it was okay. But if you go back and read the comic books, I mean, I know we all have a lot of nostalgia. Not we all, but many of us have a nostalgia about Watchmen. But if you go back and really read the comic books, they're okay. Oh. I mean, they're not. It's the same way I feel about V for Vendetta. When I read the comic books, I was like, It's only 10 episodes. I'll keep buying them until the end. I've already kind of invested. I've got sunk cost fallacy going on here. So I own them all. And, you know, the original printings or whatever, I don't know if they're worth anything. But I don't know. It's fine. It's a good movie, whatever. But, yeah, you're going to completely lose me when you show this movie in 4:3. You know, completely. So anyways, Zack Snyder said he became obsessed with the big square while shooting parts of Batman v Superman in IMAX, so he always intended for the entirety of Justice League to be composed that way, using the entire available frame of a 35mm film. So the trailers are not a mistake. It's basically the aspect ratio of an old tube TV. Are we prepared for the questions and outrage? There, you know, outrage is something I don't understand. There's so much of it online right now that I don't quite get. Like, I'm looking at this going, ugh. But
yeah, apparently the only two reactions you're allowed to have at anything on Twitter or TikTok is either it makes you just burst into tears because it's so touching, or you have to be outraged about it. There is no in between and no other reactions available.
What's the emote for meh? That's kind of the way I felt about this.
Now, honestly, I don't mind this. I don't mind any aspect ratio that a director chooses. I don't mind if the aspect ratio changes in the middle of the program. WandaVision has been doing that a whole bunch.
And it has very, very effectively, and showing you what part of it is in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what part of it is in Wanda's little world in there.
Know? So, I mean, I've got no problem with that. I personally get a little chuckle out of, I mean, we've had plenty of, should I go for CinemaScope, 2.35, 2.39 to 1 aspect ratio screen? Should I have an anamorphic lens? There's actually a question about that coming up later on, a clarification. And I'm like, yeah, that's going to be fun. 1.37 to 1 on a 2.39 to 1 screen. That's a lot. It's going to be this tiny. That's a small image with a lot of blank space on either side. Or if you're going to zoom that in to fill the entire width of your screen, you are going to be chopping off a whole lot of the top and bottom. So
how do you feel about seeing people's like abs? Because that's all you're gonna see. You're gonna see abs.
So I get a little chuckle out of that personally, because I'm like, yeah, just have a 16:9 screen, and then yes, it'll still be blanks on the left and right, but not so bad. It won't appear quite so bad. So there you go. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess some people will be asking what the heck is up, because pretty much everybody has.
I don't understand what's going on with today's world, in that people can now start to rewrite history just by saying a thing. You know, there is no force on earth that makes me believe that he had any intention of releasing this in anything other than, you know, IMAX 16:9 or 2.35 to 1 or 2.4 to 1.
Full IMAX is 1.43 to 1. And I would entirely believe that someone who's like, hey, I really like shooting in IMAX, next time, even though I don't have IMAX cameras for the entirety of the film, I'm going to use that same aspect ratio throughout. I'm like, yeah, I can believe that. I mean, Christopher Nolan, that's what he wanted to do, you know, but he decided when parts of Dunkirk were shot in 70mm that he wanted to use the entire frame of the 70mm film, and that ended up being widescreen for those portions. So, you know, yeah, that's believable to me, that he would have gone 1.43.
I don't know.
Anyway, that's what it'll be. So, okay. When you see a square on your TV, do not panic.
Yeah, it looks like a postage stamp. So one of the things that, if you're a filmmaker, which I am not, but I have read about these aspect ratios, you know, when you're wider than you are tall, it tends to emphasize, you know, larger scenes like, you know, the Avengers battle scenes, large sweeping vistas and beautiful, you know, scenery and that sort of thing. Like when you're shooting in New Zealand or Ireland or something like that. If I'm thinking about some of the, I think it was Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman back in the day, and of course all the or the Lord of the Rings movies where you had all those sweeping vistas and all that. Whereas the thinner, like the 4:3, what you have in your normal CRTs back in the day, that is more geared towards characters. Yeah. So if you're more interested in telling the character story, the taller, thinner screen aspect ratio kind of lends itself to that, because you get more of the person's body and body language in there, whereas the wider stuff, you end up cutting off a lot of their body. So if you're trying to tell a story that is more character centered, you might want to choose an aspect ratio that's a little bit taller and thinner, whereas a wider, shorter one is more for telling a bigger, grander story with, involving the backgrounds and everything like that. So when I think of a character-driven story, Justice League does not quite make the list.
I mean, he actually
and it's not even really close.
That because he said he wanted to give the feeling that these are larger-than-life, godlike beings that tower above you. So he wanted to have the exaggerated height. I'm like, that's fair enough. It's reasonable.
Yeah, that only works if you actually are in an IMAX screen. If you were at home at a 50-inch screen sitting 10, 12 feet away like most people are, it's not going to have that effect.
That's what we get. Sit a whole lot closer.
Everybody, move your seats like 17 feet closer.
Especially to your 2.35 to 1 screen.
All right, comments here from some of our listeners. Gurinder just wanted to mention that adjusting some settings in his Wi-Fi router intuitively resulted in faster download speeds and more stable streaming and gaming.
Yeah, sorry.
Unintuitively. Okay, that's why I scrunched my face. For some unknown reason, his Asus router reset itself back to default, so he was forced to set everything up again as though it was brand new. He had always had issues with his 2.4 gigahertz signal before, dropouts and speeds slower than what they should have been. There was the option to change the wireless channel, which he has done before without any improvement, but also the option to change the channel bandwidth from 20 megahertz to 40 or 40 megahertz
the width
in the case
of the
of
channel.
2.4. Okay, the width. From 20 megahertz
basically
to 40 megahertz. Okay, I get it. Plus or minus. Okay. In the case of the 2.4 gigahertz signal, he'd always opted for the higher 40 megahertz bandwidth before, since that'll offer the highest possible throughput. Well, this time he decided to give 20 megahertz a try, and even though it would lower the maximum throughput, it also means greater channel separation, which can help with reducing interference. Now his 2.4 gigahertz network has remained stable, and internet speed tests show faster download upload speeds than before. Anecdotally, games and video streams seem to load faster and remain smoother. So just a setting to check. It's just a setting to check if anyone who might be having or experiencing Wi-Fi issues. Yep, I do not have that issue, and I have Asus, and we also have the 5G in the house.
And that gives you the option for even wider band channels, 80 and 160 megahertz. Right. So a similar thing there. I mean, that's just they have these sort of overlapping channels. When you have the wider bands, you have these overlapping channels. Now, at the higher rates, they also do like beam forming and stuff, so that can help to reduce the interference. But in his case, that simple settings change helped, and he's just like, hey, I didn't really know about it before. I saw it there before, but didn't know what it did, and then this seems to have helped, so good enough.
Okay, so if anybody else is out there experiencing problems, there you go. It's like, go to your computer that's on the network and type
192.168.0.1. That'll almost certainly be your router.
That's it. That'll be it. Byron, who is not Brian, no matter how many times I misread his name, but it is Byron, decided to go for our RBH speaker upgrade, even though he already has the SVS Ultra speakers, but he listened to our advice and RBH's direct advice when he wrote to them, and he opted for 3 of the SV-661/R bookshelf, which are very large for bookshelves. They're in MTM design. The speakers with folded ribbon tweeters instead of the used towers with the center with the older dome tweeters. What fully convinced him was Dwayne over RBH. Sorry, Dune. I thought I was watching the movie. Dwayne over RBH, who had personally gone through the switch from those older towers to the new 661 models. Just like Byron, he's got subs to handle the deep bass, so his description settled it. And now Byron just needs to convince himself that they're a big upgrade from his SVS Ultra speakers. Hey, give yourself enough time, sir. Cognitive dissonance is your friend. You will do it.
Yep.
I have faith in you.
That's the end of the story. We had to know. So thank you, Byron. I hope you enjoy them. I mean, I would be kind of surprised if you didn't like them as speakers, full stop. Right. But whether or not you will really think that they are a large upgrade over your SVS Ultras, let us know. Please let us know. I would be interested to hear it.
Well, there is something to be said for we don't have to just like a speaker or just like a purchase because it is an audio upgrade. If he has decided that he wanted folded ribbon tweeters, full stop. That's just what he wanted. He wanted folded ribbon tweeters. That's what that's the new hotness, and I want to be one of the cool kids. That's enough reason to buy, even if they don't sound that much different or any different in this case. I would say that would be enough. And the larger speakers, or I mean, there can't be that much larger than the SVSs because those are pretty big bookshelf speakers. But I think that there's a really good reason. There's a lot of other reasons to like these speakers and justify your purchase without it having to be audio quality only. Okay. There's other aspects. I mean, I don't know if he had the gloss black version of the SVSs, but if he didn't, the RBHs almost certainly look better. Because, I mean, these are nice looking speakers, but I mean, they're clearly wrapped in that vinyl wrap, and it's fine, but it's, turn the lights off, please, sir. Mario. Since the topic came up, Mario, who's a member of the code making panel for the National Electrical Code, decided to help explain isolated ground outlets from regular residential outlets. This should be easy to read on the fly. Simply put, the metal tabs on the top and bottom of the outlet that get screwed into the electrical outlet box to physically secure it to the wall, those are called the yoke, Y-O-K-E. In a regular outlet, the yoke and the grounding pin are electrically connected, and therefore anything the yoke is screwed into is also grounded. In commercial installations, as we mentioned, there are often exposed metal conduit and outlets with metal outlet boxes all on the exterior of concrete walls. Those metal boxes and conduits can form their own path to ground since they're exposed. To avoid a difference in ground potential between those exposed conduits and the electrical panel, the ground pin of the outlet is isolated from the yoke. So residential is connected to the yoke, and commercial, it is isolated from the yoke. Hospital grade is about physical durability, which is what I said. But anyways, impact and hanging strength as well as the grip of the receptacles. So for residential purposes, Mario strongly recommends avoiding isolated ground outlets. If you happen to have metal outlet boxes inside your walls instead of plastic, grounding them via the yoke is by design and should not be circumvented by using isolated ground outlets. If you happen to have a house with a pony panel, so there's no description of what that is.
That's like a secondary panel. So sometimes you put on an extension to your house rather than getting an entirely bigger panel. You have a secondary pony panel, they call it. It's like a little sidecar panel.
Right. So if you happen to have a house with a pony panel, you can end up creating a difference in ground potential that could result in your gear getting fried during a surge, and also ground loops, which are more ground loops are the ones we really won't want. I mean, we don't want things to get fried, but the ground loop was something you will notice immediately. So maybe don't go for the absolute cheapest outlets because there are genuine differences in the amount and quality of the metal used for the conductors, as well as tolerances for grip strength. But there's no reason to ever pay more than $3 for a residential outlet. So, splurge and spend three bucks. And it should not have isolated ground. All right.
Yeah, that's pretty much from the horse's mouth there. So nothing we would disagree with about that. That's for sure. But
this is my if I had a T-shirt, it was like, I don't disagree with experts, just because of something I read online. But I mean, that would be my T-shirt.
I didn't realize that going for, say, a $6 or $8 commercial outlet with an isolated ground could actually have a detriment. I didn't realize there could be a downside to it, and there can be. So even more reason to save the money. It's actually safer.
Right. So it's funny because you think, okay, I'm going to buy, you go to buy an outlet, you're like, I can spend $10 on these 3 outlets that are, say, residential, or I can spend $20 on these 3 outlets that say commercial. Well, commercial should be higher quality than residential. But to the layperson, which is what we are, there's just no indication, no way of knowing that that's not the case. I mean, sometimes I think of commercial grade things and I'm like, oh, they cut all the corners. But sometimes I think of commercial grade things, I'm like, oh, it's got to be better or else, things catch on fire. So that would be the case here. All right, Mario also shared pictures of the conduit he ran inside of his front wall and the finished result with his in-wall speakers and 75-inch TV. For cables coming up from the basement through the base plate of his framing, he used the largest recommended diameter, which is 3/4 inch. For his HDMI cables inside the wall, he used an even larger 1.5-inch diameter PVC, and that made pulling 2 HDMI cables quite easy. He mentions that if you're having issues with tight bends or corners, you can install a plastic outlet box and then just have a blank faceplate rather than trying to deal with a difficult bend inside the wall. And if you're worried about creating flanking paths for sound, as long as you use in-wall rated wires, the conduit doesn't actually have to enter the outlet boxes and make a physical connection. You can just leave a small gap between the conduit and the wall box, and that way you can wrap putty around the box and the opening where the cables come out, and they don't physically touch the conduit, so it's no flanking path. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, I see what he's saying. That makes sense. But Mario, next time I'm wiring a house, could you just come over?
Indeed.
Just come over, do it for me, please, because I'm afraid now. I'm afraid I'm going to buy the wrong stuff and put it in.
No, if anything, he simplified it.
He did. I mean, flanking paths, honestly, in this case, I mean, I think I would just, for the, I know what he's saying as far as physical vibrations going through the plate into the conduit and everything else. But if it's just going to be a plate on the wall with a box, on the other side, I would just take insulation and shove it in there. You know what I mean? And then put putty around or something around the plate itself.
Oh, I see. Okay, not a full
where it connects to the
putty
wall.
seal around the back box. But I mean, that's
no. I think I think having access, being able to get back in there in case you're gonna have to pull something else through is important. So you don't want to fill it with that foam crap. No. That's gonna get all hard and stuff like that, or not hard, but it's gonna be goopy and everything. But at the same time, I don't know that I would feel super comfortable doing the rest of what he said. But yes, I'm sure it works fine. All right, let's get to the questions here. I always want to say Kamran because it's a K instead of a C. But anyways,
Kamran would be fine.
Kamran.
Yeah.
Kamran says his name is Persian, so it's not just a strange spelling of Kamran, which is spelled with a C and a couple of other letters. So that's awesome.
Yes.
Persian. But is Persia still a country? What's Persian these days? What's that area called? Is it Iran, Iraq?
Iraq, yeah.
Yeah, I think Turkey also kind of falls in there somehow. I'm not really sure. Anyways, so that's cool. My wife has a very interesting name, too, because she's from Turkey, which nobody can say. Everybody thinks it's Janelle, and it is not. Second, he does have a door at the top of his stairs, and he replaced the original hollow core door with a solid core door, which is something I've been meaning to do. So the basement theater room is enclosed as far as that goes. We begged him to pull the seats forward, but it isn't going to happen. The seats will remain nestled against the back wall next to the closet that sticks out into the room on the left. So that is what it is. He's eagerly awaiting the sectional he ordered to arrive in March. The on-wall Revel surrounds got installed and ended up just a little over a foot above head height. They're angled in from the corners, though, not pointed straight at each other. And the overhead RSL speakers have been labeled as top, middles, and front heights. They're bigger than expected, but are working nicely. I see they are in the corner. Yes, and they're facing. I guess he says they're angled, but they look like they're straight out. All right,
they're basically like at a 45 because they're in the corner with their corner.
That's fine. So he managed to alter the wiring on his front wall so the front left and right speaker wires come out of the lower wall plates that were installed for 2 subs on the front wall. The 2 wall plates that are higher up on the wall, front wall, originally planned for on-wall speakers next to the TV, just have blank covers on them for now, so it's not bad. No unsightly wires hanging down at least. So should he get a taller table to hold his center speaker, he's heard it's best to have the tweeter of the center up at the same height as the tweeters from his front left and right towers. Do we agree? I mean, I guess technically I agree, but I also do not agree. like mathematically or whatever, I would agree that your tweeters should be all ear height.
That is technically that is the ideal. Well, I mean, technically the ideal is 3 identical vertical speakers across the front. Therefore, they would all be at the same height.
Center channels are designed with like very wide vertical dispersion. So, you know, of their tweeter. So, you know, I don't even aim mine, and it's not at ear height. So I'm a little bit off axis to it. And I've never thought to myself, oh man, it's not quite working. So my answer to you would be, I would not change anything for the center that would in any way create other problems. Like my TV is now too high, or, you know, I have to mount the TV near the ceiling, or I can't have as big a TV as I want, or it makes my wife mad that I have this massive table with the speaker on top of it. You know what I mean? Any of those things would be like, okay, I'm just going to put it lower. Because that's kind of how center channels are designed anyway. So
yeah, the TV's already mounted, and it's mounted like higher than I would have mounted it. However, they're sitting so far away at the back of the room that it's not probably it's not going to be like cranking your neck up to look at it. But if I had been sitting at the distance I would want to sit from a 75-inch TV, then this would be mounted too high for that, you know. But all things considered, given your seating distance way at the back of the room, that's not going to be a problem there. So I understand, yes, because of that high mount of the TV, you have the vertical space. You could raise the center speaker. Personally, I mean, given the size and width of that center speaker, I think it would just flat out look strange to rise it right to the bottom of the TV, which is essentially where the tweeters of his left and right towers are, is just below the bottom of the TV. I think it would look like some weird spindly legs to have the center speaker that high.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be against raising it a little bit, but if it's going to be any kind of significant cost to buy or build a new stand, it wouldn't be like a really high priority for me.
He's sitting so far away that the slight change in angle that there would be, I mean, you could do that just by slipping a couple of paper clips at the front of the speaker.
I really don't think you even need to tilt this center speaker, given, again, how far away you're sitting from it.
How far away
the other thing is, if you were to ever upgrade to, say, an 85-inch flat panel in the future, that would end up, because it's pretty close to the ceiling already, it would probably be a little bit lower. The bottom edge of an 85-inch TV would end up a little bit lower, so I wouldn't want to snug your current center right up against the bottom of your current TV. So, yeah, not a priority. If you were going to end up with a new stand anyway, and the new stand happens to be taller, certainly not a problem. But yeah, that's not a priority.
Okay. So regarding acoustic panels, Gick told him the best option performance-wise would be monster bass traps everywhere. For those of you that aren't aware, that is just a 4-inch thick panel. Was there a gap in those?
6 inches of insulation plus an air gap. They're almost 8 inches deep, the monster bass traps.
Okay. Well, if you look at this room, you can see why they said that, because there's literally nothing on the walls here. It's just bare walls.
And as we've said,
performance-wise,
we want all the panels to basically be as thick as possible. And that would be it. All monster bass traps everywhere would be it.
I apologize if you're hearing a bunch of extraneous noises. My wife is talking to my children. I'm hearing doors slamming, so I imagine my 17-year-old has emerged from his cave to grumble at people and be unpleasant.
I'm not really picking it up on my end, so it's probably okay.
You might not, but it might be coming through on the recording. So panels that are 4-inch thick total would fit best, so would we recommend those? And also, he likes the look of Gick's Impression Series panels with the nice patterns and wood on the faces of the panels. Would those make them too reflective, or is he overthinking it, and the addition of the scatter plates on the faces would be fine? At this point, literally, I don't care how thick the panels are, just as long as there's lots of them.
Well, I mean, I will still say if you can, the thicker the better. But if you can't, as thick as you can. If 4 inches is as thick as you can go, 4 inches it is.
There's no way I think that you can get 8 inches behind your head where you have it kind of planned back there.
He doesn't think that can happen
4-inch panels, 4-inch panels back there is just fine. I'm 100% okay with that.
If the looks of the Impression Series panel allow you to put more panels and where you want to, whereas at the plain looks, someone's going to veto it, then the Impression panels are a great choice, because it does not harm the bass absorption really whatsoever. To have those scatter plates, the large bass frequencies just wrap right around those little wood patterns on the front. And I mean, there's some advice. We heard it from Todd Welty himself, that when you're really close to the back wall, having diffusion for the higher frequencies is not a terrible idea either. It tends to scatter the highest of the high frequencies and then absorb the sort of mid-range frequencies. So no problem with that. And especially like I say, if the looks allow you to do it more easily or more happily, then by all means.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry. I went back to look at his pictures. Regarding having run Odyssey and then making some manual setting changes, everyone has talked has said to set his towers to small, even Odyssey sets them to large, even if Odyssey sets them to large, and to use an 80 hertz crossover for his towers and center, and 110 for his, or 120 for his crossover for his Revel surrounds. So that's done. I don't know that I would necessarily do that, but that's fine.
Yeah. Why would it be different?
Well, it's fine. On the topic of the distance settings, the speaker distances seem to be very close to measured physical distances, but his subwoofer, a single SVS PB2000 Pro for the time being, was given a substantially greater distance setting than the actual physical distance. Some people say to manually change it, others say to leave the distance setting alone. What's our take? The people who say to manually change it are wrong. That's the take. And the reason is because it's not setting a physical distance for your subwoofer. It's completely different. For your subwoofer, it is setting what is essentially a delay. And that delay is because of how it's bouncing around your room. Now, once you get your big sectional in here, and once you get your panels up on the wall, fully expect that distance setting to change when you rerun Odyssey. Because it will.
Good.
The settings for the rest of your speakers probably will not. But the speaker, the distance setting for your subwoofer will change, and it's because more sound will be absorbed into the walls. Therefore, the delay will have to be less, which means the distance should get a little bit closer.
Yeah, imagine that there's like a little ping sound. Now, the ping sound is high enough that it comes out of the speakers when you wanted the speakers, or it's low enough that it comes out of the sub when you want to hear the sub. But imagine there's like a ping sound, and that plays out of all the speakers and subs at the exact same time, and you want it to reach you at your seat at the exact same time, because that's what the signal said. The signal said every single speaker should play this ping sound, including the subwoofer, at the exact same time. Therefore, you should hear them all at the exact same time. Some shouldn't be arriving later than others. That's what that distance setting is trying to achieve. When it's high frequencies, they are directional. It's a straight line from the speaker to you. So the time it takes for that sound to go straight line from the speaker to you is equal to the distance. That's gonna correlate very, very closely. But for the subwoofer, the sound waves are so long that you're only ever hearing reflected sound. So the time that it takes for you to detect that sound at your seat might be different than the physical I'm looking straight at it distance of the subwoofer, because you're not hearing the straight sound that made a straight line from the sub to you. You're hearing the reflected sound that made it around your room several times before your ears detected it. And that's the reason to leave it the way Odyssey detects it for the distance.
Right. So for now, he's put a single sub close to the front left corner. He doesn't have a longer RCA cable in hand, so he doesn't have a lot of play as of right now because those things are cheap as chips, so you can buy one if you really need to. Odyssey had him set the volume on the sub before running the rest of his setup, and that ended up at -15. The scale goes from -60 to 0. After running Odyssey, the subwoofer output level was set at 0 on his denim. He set dynamic EQ to on, and it sounds boomy. So he ended up manually adjusting the subwoofer trim level to -7. Overall, that sounds better, but now he doesn't feel the chest punch or like the subwoofer is pressurizing the whole room. And these suggestions, take it off of 7. Buy a cable. Buy a cable that's longer and do a subwoofer crawl. That's the solution. But all of this changes when you get room treatment.
And
so
when you add a second sub, it changes again, big time.
Again. So you're kind of in the catch-22. You're in a holding pattern. So what you could do is just live with it at the -7 for right now, which is probably what I would do, and then wait till you get your room treatments and your sectional and everything hung up, then do the subwoofer crawl. And because if you do the subwoofer crawl now, and then you set it, you get all set up, and you put up room treatments, you got to do it again, because it doesn't count. It's just not the same room anymore. As far as the sub is concerned, you have changed the dimensions of your room in many ways because of how much sound is being absorbed into those sound absorbers. So you need to redo your subwoofer crawl. So if you don't want to do it twice, just leave it where it is for right now. Buy a cable that's long enough to go from the front of your room to the back of your room, because it's cheap. Monoprice is your friend. And then you have the options that you need.
Yeah, this is
and you can place
very tricky thing about subwoofers. I mean, it doesn't make intuitive sense. You're saying all these other speakers, I look at them, I can tell where the sound is coming from, the distances line up, the levels are what they should be. Why is it different for a subwoofer? It's because the sound waves they're producing are really, really long. In the case of 20 hertz, which your PB2000 Pro can absolutely do, that's a 56-foot long sound wave, which is larger than any dimension of your room. And you have that door at the top of your stairs, so you are in an enclosed space. It is not the same thing as a straight line sound. So it's not a matter of, oh, this subwoofer sounds boomy all the time.
Right.
It greatly depends on how those sound waves are bouncing around your room, and that depends on the subwoofer's location and your relative location, your seating location to that subwoofer. So, yeah, subwoofer crawl would be putting the sub in your seat and then you crawling around on the floor towards the front of your room in all the locations where the subwoofer might live while you listen to a bass sweep playing on repeat. And you're looking for where that sounds the most even in volume throughout the entire sweep. Right now, you very likely happen to have a big old peak that, I mean, and the reason Odyssey might not have tamed it at your main seat is because maybe to the seat just to the left of you and just to the right of you, it's actually a dip at that very same frequency, which happens all the time when you only have one subwoofer, but more than one seat. The subwoofer crawl works one seat for one sub. You go sit in the seat to your left, the seat to your right, it might be a different experience, unfortunately, and that's why we want two subwoofers in here, ultimately. That helps to even it out across all the seats. But yeah, for now, if you're not going to move it out of that corner, just, you know, make do because you know changes are on the way.
And I know this is I've said it before, and I don't know that anybody ever follows this advice, but it's actually not a bad idea to live with your subwoofer being terrible for a little bit. You know, get to know how the other half lives. This is how most people live.
Well, you know what's coming.
Because they don't do subwoofer crawls and everything else. So you just live with it, and then when you get the subwoofer set up properly, you're going to go, oh my God, that was so much better. That's what they're talking about.
You know what's coming, though, is he's going to get the room treatments, he's going to get the second sub, and he's going to go, this used to be a lot louder.
I know, it's going to be a lot louder. Don't worry, I already wrote about that. I think I have an article, I don't know if I published it or not yet, that's titled something along the lines of, I got a second sub and now I have no bass.
That one's up there, yeah.
So he got the advice that it's okay to play around with various speaker trim level trim settings. Initially, his AV guy, which is not his Magnolia Rep listener, who or our Magnolia Rep listener, who accepted our apology, by the way.
I mean, very nice.
Yeah, Rob bought him something, so you know, it's whatever. Adjusted his towers to -5 and the center to -3. This is his AV guy. Right. We don't know who this is a different AV guy, so we can insult this guy all we want. Rob, fangs out, claws bared. Yeah, let's go. Right. Let's go full Canadian bear on them over there. Or moose, whatever you guys have.
Caribou, they're the most dangerous.
Caribou. Ooh, they're spooky. The spooky caribou, the Canadian caribou. The spooky AV Canadian caribou. Unknown. Unknown to the southern part of the northern United States, but well known within Canada and Alaska as being the most audiophile of all of the animals. Anyways, some people say they like their centers a bit hotter like that. Whatever. Yeah. A bit hotter?
Yeah,
like that?
-3 instead of -5 in the center.
Oh. What? How do we know that?
He said his AV guy set his towers to -5, but his center to -3. So the center's a little bit hotter.
Okay. All right, whatever. You cut out of me so I can hear anything you said, but whatever. Okay. Some people say, whatever. Some people said to set all the speakers to 0 no matter what. Some people said to just adjust the taste. He tried playing around and thought two-channel music sounded more lively with his front, left, right set to 0 instead of -5. Was the idea of setting the front speakers lower initially to keep the front soundstage from overwhelming the surrounds and overheads? How should the speaker levels actually be adjusted? Well, first of all, you shouldn't be touching them. Let's start with that. I don't care what these other people said. So if you were to do this manually, and we often did back in the day before room correction was a thing.
And you still can.
And auto setup was a thing. And you can, and sometimes you can, if you want to check it, you can. You would buy a sound pressure level meter from Radio Shack, which was back then still a thing. And you would set it up, hopefully on some sort of stand so that you weren't touching it. And you would set it to C rating slow response. And you would sit there and you would adjust the trim. You would put your volume level all the way up to 0 or whatever it was.
The master volume started at 0 dB, full reference.
full reference volume, and then you would put out a test tone using the test tones within the receiver, and then you would look until it said, you would adjust the trim level until it said 75 dB on your Radio Shack meter, and then you would go to the next speaker and you would do that, and then you go to the next speaker and do that. So all the speakers would be set to the same level.
You know how, I mean, he described how with your subwoofer, before the whole, you know, chirps and everything played, it had you set the volume dial on the subwoofer by itself. This is the same idea, that there's a target, which happens to be 75 dB when the master volume is all the way up at 0 at full reference. And again, it's the idea that if you play the exact same signal out of every single speaker, they should all deliver the same sound to your seat, right? You move your seat, and that's going to change, because now if you're closer to the front speakers and farther away from the back speakers, then your front speaker trim level is going to go down, get quieter, and the surround speaker trim level is going to go up and get louder if you moved in that direction, or, you know, vice versa. You are very close to your surround speakers, but they're not as efficient as your front speakers, so it's a little difficult to predict, but we would expect that maybe you would be at a minus figure for your surrounds because you're so close to them. And it might be a slightly higher level, but then that's offset by how sensitive your front speakers are.
Right. So what your room correction did was set everything to be the same volume. Right. And then what you did by going in and changing the trim levels is that you're manually increasing the volume of just certain speakers. So what you should do if you are listening to 2-channel music and you want it to sound more lively is you should turn up
the master volume.
All of it. Yeah. Just the master volume, and now you've made it more lively, because that's how, I don't understand what else was going to happen.
Yeah, no, I mean,
all you've
confusing
done,
advice.
That's literally what you...
that has been given by other people, unfortunately.
This whole to taste thing is, and I there's nothing wrong with that when you're talking about bass, in my opinion, but you you can make the same argument for surrounds
and overheads, for that matter. If you really want to notice them, or the opposite, you don't like noticing them, then by making specifically the surrounds or your overheads a little bit louder than, you know, what is actual reference, where they would be exactly the same volume as your fronts given the same signal. You know, if you want to notice them more and you make your surrounds a little bit louder, you make your overheads a little bit louder, or the opposite, that is okay, but you should start from the baseline, which you've got Odyssey. It nails distances and levels. We can argue about EQ and all that, but distances and levels, it nails.
Yes. So your question was, how should the speaker levels actually be adjusted? Was the idea of setting the front speakers and lower initially to keep the front soundstage from overwhelming the surrounds and overheads? The answer is, the idea was to keep them all the same volume, so that you heard the music / movie in relation, the speakers in relation to each other, as intended by the person who mixed that or mastered that
Except
movie.
We don't actually know what Odyssey set. We only know what his AV guy set manually. Now, maybe those were one and the same, because the center isn't necessarily exactly as loud as the towers. So maybe it needed 2 decibels more signal level than the towers did. We don't know, but if it was that the AV guy manually changed them, then, I mean, honestly, run Odyssey again. That's what I would do. And where it sets your distances...
Whoever this AV guy is, don't let him in your house and touch your remotes
Where it sets your distances and trim levels, I would leave them there and at least get used to that first.
Right. So I have a problem when somebody goes online and reads something and says, I have to adjust these settings in my AV receiver based on something I read online and not based on some preference I personally have. You know, run Odyssey, have it set all the levels, and again, you're in a room that's going to change drastically.
Yeah, you're going to need to run Odyssey again once you have those room treatments up, once your sectional arrives, and once you get a second subwoofer. Every single one of those changes requires another run of Odyssey.
And the things that you prefer right now are probably based on what you're hearing in your current extremely reflective room. So yeah, maybe you want things changed a little bit because things are bouncing around like crazy and you're getting some weird reflections and some bass. We know you're getting a big bass boost someplace, probably in like the 40 to 50, 60 hertz range, with that with you saying that it's far too loud at your seat, booming at your seat. So wanting to turn the bass down because of that is a preference you're having right now. Do not expect that when you get room treatments in here, you're going to have that same preference. I think that's you have to start again, listen again, live with it again, and then say, okay, I'm not noticing my overheads as much as I want to. I'm going to turn all those up 3 dB. Or I'm not noticing, my surrounds are constantly blowing me out of my seat because they're so close to my head. I'm going to turn those down 3 dB or 2 dB or 1 dB or something, and see if I like that better. But that's because of something you like, not because of something something you experienced, not because of something you read online. Okay. So don't change it because your AV guy says, or your Magnolia guy says, or we say. You change it because you heard something, you live with it the way that it was supposed to be to begin with, which is what Odyssey did. And then, at least for the channel levels and all that, and then you make a decision. All right. So if he powers on his Denon, even for just for music from the HEOS app or AirPlay from his phone, his TV powers on too. He tracked that down to the HDMI control and HDMI-CEC settings. If he turns those off, he can listen to music without his TV powering on, but then he has to use more than one remote when he wants to watch a movie. So what's the best solution here? Harmony, if you can find one.
Yeah, and actually, thankfully, there's some hope that they are coming back, because like Amazon was saying, these will be back in stock in April. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that's better than absolutely nothing. So hopefully Harmony.
The companions were on sale like on Woot for one day. I mean, I don't know that we got that out there to anybody, but I saw that.
Yep.
And that would have been a good thing to grab. But yes, Harmony is your friend here. HDMI-CEC is exactly like what you're describing. You're like, if you want to control everything with one remote, then everything's going to go the way that HDMI-CEC thinks it should go. And that means your TV's powering on everything else. Whereas with Harmony, or even if you want to, get a universal remote with macros, and you want to program it yourself, you can do that. So you have, one button that powers on just the receiver and gets the HEO stuff going, and the other one that powers on the receiver and the TV and gets the movie stuff going. So you can do that with any universal remote that has a macros function.
There's like the
Harmony just makes it easy.
The sofa baton is a very inexpensive, but it's a nice ergonomic design, and that could be an inexpensive way to do it. If you just want to use what you have, the remote that came with your Denon, it does have like, the old school built-in codes, where if all you need to do is power on your TV, because you're not using the audio in your TV, and you likely aren't switching inputs. You probably just have the one input that comes out of your AV receiver. So if all you need to do is power on and off the TV, and you don't want to physically pick up a different remote, you can definitely program the Denon remote to have power just for the TV. And that could be all you need.
Right. Then you're using the same remote. You might have to press a different button for the TV, but you'll have the same remote.
One remote.
So the biggest problem he's had is with his Apple TV 4K. He followed the recommended output setting advice, set the Apple TV 4K to output 4K SDR, then activated match frame rate and match dynamic range so that HDR will play in HDR, Dolby Vision will play in Dolby Vision, and 24 frames per second will play in 24 frames per second instead of 60. But with his Apple TV plugged into his Denon and his Denon plugged into his 2020 TCL 6 Series TV, whenever the frame rate or HDR signal changes, his TCL goes blank and loses the Denon signal entirely. Yep, and he's got a picture of that happening right here. He can avoid this by not using match frame rate or match dynamic range settings, but then everything is always at 60 frames per second. Everything is always in HDR, even when it should be. He's made sure that the Denon has enhanced turned on for its HDMI inputs, and his TCL is set to HDMI 2.0. But no matter what, he keeps losing the signal if the frame rate and HDR are allowed to switch. Any ideas? I mean, I'm going to blame HDMI-CEC for this, but I'm sure Rob's got an answer.
So, I mean, this is a little bit tricky. So what I would ask you to do is take the Apple TV 4K and plug it straight into the television with a short HDMI cable, like a 6-foot HDMI cable. And, this is just temporarily to test. And go back to the settings you have, because those are correct in your Apple TV, which is 4K SDR is the default, and then match frame rate and match dynamic range, and go through the tests, go into Disney Plus and see. Now, your TV should go black for a moment. That is normal. It is changing signals. It's changing frame rate, or it's changing between standard dynamic range and high dynamic range. But then, of course, the image should come back now at the correct dynamic range and the correct frame rate. If that works with the Apple TV 4K plugged straight into the TV, and it should, because these TCLs are working, the 2020 TCLs are working with like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, and people are able to switch down to, 1080p 120 and then back to 4K 60 and HDR versus no HDR. That's working. So if that works with the Apple TV 4K plugged straight into the TV, and it should, then my guess is that the lengthy HDMI cable between your Denon and the TCL, unfortunately, is probably the issue. You're probably borderline.
I'm gonna scroll back up.
Yeah, you're probably borderline on that signal, and it's an in-wall HDMI cable. That's going to be such a pain in the butt if that is the issue.
Where's this gear?
What's that?
Where's this gear? Is it in the closet someplace or something?
Yeah, well, it's right beside that closet. You can't really see it in the images, but...
Oh, I see it. I see it.
Yeah, there's a little rack right beside his closet. So, but I mean, unfortunately, that's basically got to be it. Because this functionality is working in other people's setups, and that can be the cause, sadly. And I don't know what your AV guy might have done with that in-wall HDMI cable, but...
Hopefully it's in conduit.
Yeah.
Probably
if it isn't, you might either have to open up some walls or get an unsightly cable that's going outside the walls.
Or you can go to the AV Gadgets and look at the ways to hide your wire. HDMI, unfortunately, is the least hideable wire in all the wires that you can hide. Like, speaker cable is not that bad, but HDMI is not so good. Manny. Manny has a situation where his projector screen is mounted above his fireplace, so he has physical limitations on the maximum screen height. For that reason, he recently switched to a 2.35:1 aspect ratio screen. He's using it with his older BenQ W1070 projector for the moment. He's racked up about 3,000 hours on it, and he's interested in getting into 4K and HDR. So while he isn't in any big rush, he wants to start planning for a projector upgrade. Price is a concern, so what he'd like to do is have some models in mind that he can keep an eye out for on the used market. If he were buying new, he'd have to keep the price under $3,000, and since he has the 2.35:1 screen now, he really wants his next projector to have a motorized lens with lens memory. How skeptical or trusting should it be of buying a used projector? Well, it depends on where you buy it from.
Big time.
So there's that. You're going to buy it off of eBay or Craigslist, then, I would be very skeptical.
Right.
If you buy it from someplace like, I mean, even Epson's themselves, and they'll sell B stock. That I would be 100%
yes,
okay
Epson's
with.
Clearance Center. If you decide that you're good with an Epson model, Epson's Clearance Center is a great place to look. Like right now, they got the 5040 UB. They've got some of those in stock for $1,500 right now, which is.
I was so looking at those when I thought my projector was.
It's
broken.
half the price of the 5050 UB, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Some of the differences, but so yeah, Epson's Clearance Center for sure. The AVS Forum classifieds, by and large, those are enthusiasts. Nobody but enthusiasts knows about AVS Forum, so you're not going to find just totally random people on there.
Right.
And one of the other things I'll say is if it's somebody who's selling like a JVC 4K projector or a Sony 4K projector, like it's unlikely that that's going to be a fly by the seat of their pants, didn't take care of this at all person. Like the only people buying those projectors tend to be enthusiasts, kind of. It's just a little bit of that. But I mean,
unless it's a complete scam, in which case you're gonna get an empty box.
But I mean, the main thing is
Barbie-sized
I would always assume any used projector that I'm buying that I'm gonna have to buy a new lamp for it. I would just assume that because no matter what they say, however many hours. Who knows?
They can go into the menu and just reset the hours.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not that hard.
I would just make that assumption that I'm going to have to buy a lamp and factor that into the cost.
Yeah. All right. So, what are some models you should keep in mind while browsing the used market?
Yeah.
I mean, basically, it depends on how far out you're planning on buying. So, I mean, you've only got 3,000 hours on this bulb. You might be coming towards, depending on how you've treated it, you might be coming close to the end of its lifespan. You might have another 1,000 or 2,000 hours left on it. Who knows? But I would be looking at this, like the most recent ones and last year's.
Oh, sure.
The ones that are comparison, and I would keep an eye on those. And I would be looking at JVC and Epson. The 5040 and the 5050 would be the two I'd be looking at right now. And the JVC what is it?
NX5 is the least expensive of the genuine 4Ks.
Okay, I was thinking 7.
Well,
but,
yeah, I mean, if you
oh.
can, that's going to be, it's like, that's a $7,500, $8,000 projector new. So getting that down to $3,000, I don't know.
Well, it depends on how long he sits on this
That's true.
projector he currently has. You know? And if it's used, you might actually get that.
Maybe.
You'll have to keep an eye out.
Yeah, so I will first say, over at projectorcentral.com, they have a great database of like all the projector models that have basically ever been since they came into existence as a website, and you can choose resolution, manufacturer, whether or not it has motorized lens. Like, they've got drop-down menus for all those filters, and that'll give you a wonderful list that you can peruse yourself. But some of the ones I would look out for, just like Tom said, I'll start at the highest end and work my way down. So if you can find a JVC NX5 or NX7, those are also known as the RS1000 and RS2000 respectively, because JVC has this weird, consumer versions and pro versions, but they're identical, except like one of them has a silver ring on the front and the other one has a gold ring on the front. But yeah, those ones would be great to keep an eye out for. The NX5, the /RS1000, possibly, because that's a $5,500 projector new, so getting that used down at $3,000 is not out of the realm of possibility. Those are the top choice because they're basically the only genuine 4K models with frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, which is a game changer for HDR, and JVC is kind of the only game in town to offer that. Right below those would be the Sonys. You're giving up the frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping, but you're still getting genuine 4K, and you're still getting liquid crystal on silicon panels, which is the highest contrast type of panels that you can get for projectors. So the VPL295ES is the current $5,000 model, but the outgoing model is the VPL285ES, and that definitely might be something you could find on the used market, especially people who are upgrading to the 295 from the 285, which a lot of Sony owners are that type. So the 285, the thing to know about there is that it does not have full 18 gigabit per second HDMI 2.0 inputs, but it has greater than 10.2. So it's in this weird middle ground where it's got like 14 gigabit per second inputs, which means that you can actually do 4K 60 with HDR, but not at 444 chroma. You have to go down to the 420 chroma, which is what is on your discs or coming from your streaming services anyway. It's just that you have to make sure to set your players to not output 444, but you can still do 4K 60 HDR with that VPL 285 from Sony. Now, JVC's models that are not genuine 4K, but they're a 1080p panel that they wobble, so they're compatible with 4K and HDR, and they have terrific contrast. So that was like their X790, which again, the Pro version was known as the RS540, or the step-down model, which was the X590, or the Pro version was the RS440. Those, again, definitely you might be able to find those at the price used, because there were a lot of JVC owners who have upgraded to the genuine 4K models, and those older E-Shift models might be available. And then Epsons, as we talked about. The difference between the 5050 UB and the 5040 UB is the 5040 UB cannot do 4K 60 with HDR. It is limited to 4K 30 with HDR because it has the 10.2 gigabit per second inputs. The 5050 got the bump up to the full 18 gigabit per second inputs. If you want the cheapest, that still has motorized lens and lens memory, then that's the Epson 4000 or the Epson 4010. Those are not ultra black models. They are 1080p models that wobble the panel twice per frame to be compatible with 4K, but they do have the lens memory and the lens shift, and those you can find for like $1,500 new. So, yeah.
Okay. JR. JR is waiting on his acoustic panels from GEC. Yes, I just searched my email, and it seems that when I ordered these things on January 13th, or no, that wasn't when I ordered them. I don't know when I ordered them. But at January 13th, I got an update that said that it wasn't going to come till, they weren't going to ship until March 12th.
There you go.
So, apparently. You and I are both waiting, JR. I'm very excited, a little anxious. I keep forgetting they exist. In the meantime, he's taken down some, but not all of his foam treatments, and he got a calibrated U-Mic 1 from Cross Spectrum Acoustics. He's trying out Room EQ Wizard for the first time. He wanted to get an overall sense of the response in his room, so he ran his first sweeps with both his front, left, and right speakers playing, and his 2 subwoofers active. So I remember this room. The graphs he's got look kind of scary to him. They're making him think he has some major issues that he hopes, but isn't sure, that GIG panels can improve. Can we help explain to him what's going on, how to get the most useful graphs to examine Room EQ Wizard? Left, right subs at ear level, left, right subs. Okay, so let's see here. He's got a major suck out at around 350, it looks like, and then a pretty massive dip between 1K and 3K, kind of overall dips down pretty low there.
Sure, except that this is with both front speakers playing and the subwoofers playing, and so right away we would say that that isn't how we would measure to get a good idea of the acoustics in this room. We would measure one speaker at a time.
Yes.
Now this is again, if we end up coming up to the controversial part of this podcast, if we get there, this is one of the reasons why, like the Harman research that Floyd Toole did, he did with it in mono. He was like, we got to measure one speaker at a time. We got to listen to one speaker at a time, because as soon as you put even just stereo speakers, our brain does so much filtering, and there are so many audio illusions and so many wave interactions and, you know, wave cancellations and double ups that are the result of having 2 sound sources. It's not inherent to what each individual speaker was doing, or even what the room was doing to each individual speaker. It's that we had multiple sound sources working together, and that's a whole part of what creates the stereo illusion for our brains, and it gets really quite complicated. So trying to discern what is going on acoustically in your room when you're playing 3 sound sources simultaneously, we basically can't draw good conclusions from that. Now, one thing we can see, even when we're playing all these sound sources, is looking at the waterfall graph that's derived from this. You know, that we're not,
looks pretty good.
Yeah, we're not seeing gigantic differences throughout the mid-range and treble. Now, there is a sort of general rise in the decay times in the treble, in the like 3, 4, 5 kilohertz range. Now, again, we don't know. Is that just because this was 2 speakers playing simultaneously, or is that part of the room? That is something that potentially, if we get a look at one speaker at a time, if that's still there, some diffusion in this room would not be a bad idea. We shouldn't be seeing a rise basically at all as we go up in frequency. We would expect to see a rise in decay times as we go down in frequency. That's just normal in any room. But going up, there shouldn't really be any occasion where it rises, and so far, with 2 speakers playing, we see a bit of that. It might be that you would benefit from diffusion. But yeah, we want to measure one speaker at a time. And there we're hoping to see pretty flat frequency response, even decay times. If there is a rise in decay times, it's as we're going down.
Right. So what you want to do is you want to send us actually 2 graphs. You want to send us a graph that has the measurements of your left speaker and your right speaker, but in different colored lines next to each other, on top of each other, basically. And then you want a second graph that is just your subwoofer, and you can cut that off at, like, you know, 200 hertz or something like that, 200 hertz down to 10,
and there, I mean, having both subs playing together for that one, yes, we want that, because they are, the 2 subs and the room are all acting as one bass producing thing. Now, if we then want to take that a step further, it would be those same measurements, but in your different seats. In your seat to the left, the same things, the 3 measurements, the left speaker only, the right speaker only, and the 2 subs together, and then in the seat to your right. And that way we can start looking for the uniformity across those 3 seats. But the main thing to get across right now is do not panic about this somewhat jagged-looking frequency response that you got when you had left, right, and 2 subs all playing together. Because mainly, we don't know what's due to interaction of just having the 2 speakers playing in stereo together. And we don't know that this, you know, suck-out that we're seeing at 350 hertz or so would be there without that interaction. So don't panic yet, and measure one at a time.
All right. Seth found this just 3 weeks ago. He's been listening to us at work and says great stuff. He's almost made it through 1 episode.
Right.
Weeks. Right. 3 weeks. Got it? Because we have long episodes.
We do. That's the joke.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
Well explained.
Everybody
Tom.
get that?
As long as you explain it, it'll be funny.
It'll be funny if I explain it, Rob. That's how we do it here in our caribou-less land of Americas. So he recently moved. His new apartment is only 600 square feet total, so we can pressurize the heck out of this. Open all the doors. Put one sub in the front of the house. One on the... Okay, anyways. So his TV and surround setup is in the living room that's open to the kitchen, but it's still a small space. He's basically got one seat that he cares about, but he's already noticed that the bass builds up like crazy in the notch beside the kitchen, and it could be troublesome and annoying. I had a friend who, and I've talked about this many times, best bass in his whole house was in the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah, it's just kind of normal. You go in the bathroom, it's just crazy in there, but everything else.
We do not doubt you, Seth. We do not doubt you at all.
Yes, we do not doubt you at all. So where does he says it builds up? It builds up crazy in a notch beside
yeah, so you see where the
kitchen
there is sort of like in the middle at the top. You can see the range there. So just straight to the left of that. It's like you come in through the door. I think that's a closet straight ahead. So it's kind of got like a nook in there. He's like, yeah, you go in there to put your jacket away, and it's like crazy bass time.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. Yeah, I see it. Okay. So sound system is 10 years old, entry-level HDR, Yamaha HDR 3064 receiver. I have no idea what that one is, but it's got HDMI ports, but it's been damaged and they aren't working, so he's relying on the optical audio only for the time being. He doesn't even have YPOW of any kind, and the only bass management is a global crossover. He's using it with JBL Studio Series speakers up front, plus a pair of Dayton B652 surrounds, a single 12-inch Dayton sub. He also has a pair of bass shakers. He intends to make DIY acoustic panels, although other than the bass build up in that one spot, he's noticing any bad acoustic issues. Just because you don't notice them doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm just going to throw that out there. Yeah. He's got a budget of about $1,500 to work with, and he's wondering what is the best way to spend it. Whatever he buys, he wants it to last. It's always the case, but this is AV, and it doesn't. And he would be able to move with him again, potentially to a larger space. Well, couldn't it be smaller? Let's put it that way. 600 square feet is not that big. He's tempted by the new Anthem receiver models. He's read good things about Anthem ARC Genesis room correction, and he likes the look of the new MRX 540 model. He also likes its touted feature of being able to freely assign its 5 built-in amplifiers, since he has a Crown XLS 1002 Pro amp on hand, and he figures he could use that to power his front, left, and right speakers. He wants a pair of height speakers. But that model would eat up his whole budget. Would it be crazy to splurge on the Anthem? Too long didn't read? Yes. He's also thinking of dual SB2000 Pro subs. Would be a nice upgrade, and maybe having dual subs could solve the bass build-up problem beside his kitchen, but again, that would be his whole budget. So should he get a lesser receiver and only one new sub? What do we think he should do, and what do we think he should buy? What is this sub right now? 12-inch Dayton audio. I'll be honest with you. If it were me, the first thing I would do, I would get the receiver and the room treatments and stick with that, because the receiver will or will not age well, depending on how long you stay in this place. It will or will not be able to expand to as many speakers as you want it to later on in life. But right now, since HDMI 2 point whatever it isn't really fully implemented anywhere, I would, just buy the one that kind of works for you right now and has the room correction that you would use right now, and assume that when you move to a bigger place, you're going to also move to a bigger receiver. Room treatments are universal, son.
Oh, yes.
And if you make them yourself, then when you move and you said, oh, I need them to be smaller, you just cut you pop them out of their frames, you throw the frames away, or you modify the frames and cut the insulation to the size you want, and then put them back up on your walls. Not a big deal. So those will go anywhere you want with you. Because you only have the one seat you care about at this moment, I don't really see a huge reason to get a second sub to pair with your Dayton, unless you really, really want to. And even if you did, where would you put it?
Yeah, because I mean, the only thing is, it's fair enough to say, hey, I mean, I could try doing a subwoofer crawl, but I just don't have that many places this sub can go. I mean, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to say. So, Yeah, I mean, I'm in agree. I think you need a new receiver. It sounds like what you've got is on its last legs, and
at the very least, it can do room setup for you, and that would be
right.
a pretty big benefit. I don't know that room correction is going to do much until you start putting insulation everywhere you can in this. I mean, I would put it in the kitchen. I don't know. Oh, there's this refrigerator. So to the right of the stove there's a big empty wall. I mean, you might have something there now, like a piece of furniture, which could act as diffusion, so it's fine. But within your home theater space, I would be putting panels in the corners. I would be putting panels in that little nook. I would put a panel. Put the panels
everywhere that you can. Yeah, everywhere that you can will help. I wouldn't go for I wouldn't blow the whole budget on the Anthem.
No.
For one reason, they've delayed them again. They're not even available to purchase and won't be for a couple more months at the earliest. But it just doesn't make sense on a 7-channel receiver with only 5 amplifiers built in to spend $1,600 on that. It's like, no, it's not going to give you the type of return on investment that you'd be hoping for spending that kind of money. Now, you know, do we want to look as high as an X3600 and X3700 from Denon? You know, those are where you have to go to get pre-outs if you're in the Denon lineup. Any of the lower models don't have pre-outs. You don't need pre-outs in this current setup. The only possible reason would be if you did move to a much larger room and sat much farther away in the future. And as Tom says, and I agree with this, buy what suits you now, because we all have plans about what's going to come, but until it happens, buying for the future rarely turns out to be the case, and you almost always want something new. Once that time actually comes and you actually do move, you almost always want something new, no matter what you bought previously. So, all that put together, I would go to Accessories for Less. I would get a Denon X2600. It does not have pre-outs, but it's $600. You are not blowing your budget. You still have $900 left. That allows you to get to 2 subwoofers if you want them much sooner. You barely have to save up any more money, and that's what I would point you to. I think that's the right choice. X2600H over at Accessories for Less, $600.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to tell you to buy another subwoofer or upgrade your subwoofer or something like that, but I don't see the return on investment here. I think that room treatments, number one, I think quality of life investment is just getting a receiver that works for you at this point. And if you were going to try to buy a receiver that was going to last for a long time, first of all, it doesn't really exist right now. But if it did, it would be a Yamaha of one of. But I think that's going to get pretty close to blowing your budget on that. I would rather spend the bulk of it on like what we're saying here. You know, $600 for the receiver, and you know you've got $900 left over just for room treatments, and just get those. Just get lots of those. So if you're going to get printed panels, just be prepared to wait until you're old and dead and moved into your new place. Karl. So Martin Scorsese penned an essay for Harper's magazine, Il Maestro, Federico Fellini and the Lost Magic of Cinema. Okay. All right. Get off my lawn. Get off my lawn, he said very loudly to all the AV people. There have been several takes posted online, mostly focusing on his criticism of essentially all forms of media being reduced to a single term of content, and studios viewing everything only through the lens of them being properties, the only value of which is how much revenue they can generate and how easy it is to fit them into a recommendation algorithm. Scorsese concludes that knowledgeable filmmakers and film and art historians need to do a better job of sharing that knowledge, history, context, and passion with as many people as possible, because we can't depend on the movie business to take care of cinema. It is now the mass virtual entertainment business, and the emphasis is always on the word business. So he's not against the transition to streaming. In fact, he sees it as a great way to reach more people than ever, but he wants there to be curation and an effort by those of us who know cinema and its history to add education and suggestions rather than only relying on similar subject matter or genre and algorithms. What's our take? So when a long time ago, I did a speech for my Toastmasters group that was basically why millennials suck. And what I did is I took a bunch of quotes and I just put them up there on a PowerPoint, put them up there and read the quote, and all the older people laughed and all the millennials cringed, and then I put the author underneath it and was like, Play-Doh.
Okay.
I mean, like, for as long as there have been old people, they have complained about the new stuff.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
that is part of it. I did not read the article, so I'm not gonna directly comment on what he said, and I don't necessarily think I need to, because this is a common theme when somebody gets to the point where they're looking around and people are enjoying TikTok and they don't get it. And they're like, okay, this is not, this is not what I like, and I don't understand why these people like it, and I don't understand why it has any value, and it's not what I'm used to, and therefore it must be somehow taking away from what I did. And that's just not the case. I'll be honest, and I know people are going to be shocked, appalled, and upset with me, but I have not seen the Godfather movies.
Okay.
I've just never gotten around to watching them. And at this point, I don't know that I ever will, but I will. If I ever get a chance, I probably will. So there's a part of me that knows that I have missed out on things. I slept through most of what's Citizen Kane because I had to watch it in school, and it was after lunch, and I slept through most of it because it was boring. But things that I am interested in, older movies I am interested in that I think are classics and that most people would agree are classics, at least of their genre, things like Jaws. I'll sit down and watch those with the children that I have that are interested in them, and they will either enjoy them or they won't, but they will at least have an appreciation at some point. The idea that the masses need to be spoon-fed by the experts is only kind of elitist, I guess, is a nice way of saying that. I mean, the reality is there's always been the mass majority of people who are just gonna consume whatever is the most popular thing at the time. That's why pop music is still online on the radio. That's why Taylor Swift can make $1 bajillion. It doesn't challenge you. It doesn't rock the boat. It doesn't cause you to have to think or reflect or anything else. Not that I know anything about Taylor Swift other than that she's popular. I can probably not even name a Taylor Swift song, using her as a probably unfair example. But the reality is that there's always going to be people out there that care. And those people that care don't need to be curated to. They will find what they want. And believe it or not, those algorithms that you're decrying so much will find out that those people care about those things and will recommend things to them. Now, there are problems with algorithms, and we've seen that through Facebook and Twitter and these social media, YouTube in particular, where the more inflammatory the content is, the more people click on it, therefore the more they recommend more inflammatory stuff. And that is a problem. There's no doubt that we're seeing the real fallout of that.
It doesn't always have to be that way. That can be changed with programming.
That's right. That's right. So, I understand where he's coming from, at least superficially, but I stand by my initial statement that it is mostly a get off my lawn.
So, I mean, the thing is, I know this feeling of, I'm just turning 40 now, so I'm old enough to watch stuff that is pretty recent, that is referencing things that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I know what they're referencing. And my niece and nephew, no idea what that reference is to.
Do you think my kids have any idea what the genres of TV shows WandaVision is referencing?
Right.
My wife and I are like, oh, this is like Mary Tyler Moore. And they're like, who?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this is like Family Matters. Who? Oh, this is
Van Dyke Show.
They don't get any of that.
Exactly. And so I get that bit of feeling. I'm not sure what that's called. It's not nostalgia. It's a little bit like ennui, I guess. But, where you're kind of like, I know, and I know why, that, the kids that I know aren't getting everything that I'm getting from this because they just don't know the reference. Now, the thing is, everybody alive today has heard of William Shakespeare. I don't know how much everybody has read, but you've probably at least heard of William Shakespeare. And if you read William Shakespeare's plays today, there's a ton of stuff in there that we have no idea, reading it today, is actually a reference to contemporary plays that were being done by other less famous playwrights whose works we're not reading today. But he was absolutely taking stuff that was done in contemporary playwrights and contemporary music of the time and contemporary stories of the time, and that's all being referenced in his plays, and we have no idea. Now, again, we can have that feeling of ennui. Oh, it'd be kind of cool if we did get every reference that's in there. But it doesn't prevent us from still recognizing the greatness of William Shakespeare's plays. I mean, what's funny to me is like Family Guy. There's a gazillion references in every episode of Family Guy that, like, I don't get them all. I'm not quite as old as Seth MacFarlane is. He's got writers who are a little bit older than him, and they watch shows that I didn't watch, and there's a gazillion references, and I'm not getting them all, and my niece and nephew are getting even fewer of them. So that is always going to be the way. We have this weird scenario where we have people who are alive and old enough today that they probably didn't see the very first movies and TV shows as they were coming out, or they might have in the case of television, but there was little enough that they could have, if they were interested, and they could have gone back and seen almost every important film and TV show. And some of those people are still alive today, and they're seeing that transition happen. So for them, they had the whole back catalog, and now we're getting to the point where it's just not feasible to watch and listen to everything that came before in what was a new medium at the beginning of, the 20th century. So this is always going to happen. I agree with Tom. I actually think algorithms and computer and machine learning and artificial intelligence could do a better job of helping us find the references than has ever been possible before, because they don't forget, and everyone can have access to them. Like, not everyone is going to have access to a historian who is alive and remembers. Even if that person is still around, not everybody can get to them and hear their advice. Whereas something artificial intelligence, that might actually be more accessible and have a better memory than has ever been possible before. So is it the case right now today? Is Martin Scorsese correct that right now today the algorithms aren't doing a great job, and we do have people who are alive, and it would be great if we could get their insight? I don't have a beef with that. I know that feeling, and I know where he's coming from. But I actually have
those people hope. Always end up becoming gatekeepers, though, and that's what the algorithms can get around is this idea that I'm never gonna recommend this movie because it's substandard compared to the original. Like, I remember, and I can't tell you the movie, but the movie came out in the last 5 years, and my friend's teenage daughter was like gaga for it. I mean, she was just thought it was the best thing. She's like, "Oh my god, it totally spoke to me." Blah blah blah. It's like so original. I never saw the twist coming. I watched it. I was like, I've seen this movie like 10 times before. This is the exact same plot, but she's just seen it for the first time. So that's why I watch Jaws with my son, and he's like, "This isn't scary." I'm like, "It's not scary because everything else did this and then did it again. Saw this and did it again. This is the first one." And so a creator ends up becoming somebody who says, "No, you can't watch any of the movies that were inspired by Jaws until you see Jaws." And that's not helpful. That's not helpful. That's not what you want. I love going I love going back and watching old Alfred Hitchcock, Dario Argento, those types of real auteurs who were totally changing and doing something different than anybody had ever done before, at least in my mind. And maybe I'm completely wrong. It's just, to my mind, that's what they were doing, and then appreciating them for what they were, so that when you see another movie that's based off of them or apes from them, you say, okay, I can kind of appreciate that. But guess what? You don't need to know anything about those other movies to still appreciate the newer movie, as long as it's done well. And that's perfectly fine. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I'm done. Okay. We're barely going to get through any questions as it is, so on we go. Nick.
There's not that many. It must not be that many questions because we're three quarters of the way through this thing. But they must be short. Nick has a Denon X3600H receiver and a pair of Rythmik FV15 HP subs, so he must have a big room. Rather than leaving them on all the time or relying on a signal sensing auto power setting, he'd like to use a 12-volt trigger signal. He says that his subs each have a 12-volt trigger plug, but this Denon only has one 12-volt trigger output. One sub is about 15 feet from the receiver, and the other would require a 45-foot cable run. So can he use a Y splitter? What would he need? Is there anything in the receiver settings that would need to be configured, or can he use the RS-232 port on the back of the Denon somehow? A Y splitter should be fine. I can't imagine any reason why it wouldn't be.
Totally fine. Because I'm assuming you
electricity travels at the speed of light.
I'm assuming you want to turn on both of your subwoofers at the same time and turn them off at the same time. I don't think you need independent control of one sub and not the other at any given moment. So there is a single 12-volt trigger output on the back of the Denon, a Y splitter out of that. Now, you do want to use 3.5 millimeter mono. So that
Yes,
can be a
that's
little
important.
bit tricky to look for. You might have to search for that a little bit because most of the 3.5 millimeter plugs are stereo, and sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. It depends on exactly the length of the tip and ring inside of the jack sometimes. So if you go mono, it'll always work. So yeah, mono is what you want, a 3.5 millimeter mono Y splitter and two 3.5 millimeter mono cables. There's no reason to mess around with the RS-232 port to do this. You can just use the 12-volt trigger that's built into the Denon. There are settings under the general tab in the Denon's menu that allow you to set what it is that activates that trigger. Because it's not by default, it's just I turned on my Denon, therefore I send out the 12-volt trigger signal. Sometimes people want a little bit more control than that, so you can tie it to your zone 2, you can tie it to a specific input instead of just power on, power off. So that might be something to adjust, but otherwise, Y splitter, mono 3.5 millimeter cables.
Yeah. Yeah. Your one sub might turn down about just a fraction of a nanosecond after the other one. If you can hear that, please report to your neuropsychologist, because you're not. Eric, we always said to use the mic that comes with your receiver to do the auto setup and room correction because there are known inaccuracies within those cheap mics, but compensation is built into receivers to account for that. Well, he has an Onkyo 676 with AccuEQ, and the included microphone broke. With nobody answering customer service over at Onkyo USA these days, what can he do? Can he use a mic from a different brand? No, probably not.
I mean, honestly, it is one of the worst mics that
I would do this
ever been out there.
Not only that, but AccuEQ is also one of the worst. But
kind of garbo.
It should be. It should be able to do levels and distances, okay? But that would be about it.
Yeah.
If you can't find anything on like Amazon or the used market or something like that, then I would just level match with using literally my phone would be better than not doing.
Yeah, because I mean, our advice with the Onkyo AccuEQ is if you do use it, only use it for the levels and distances, then deactivate the equalization part of it anyway. That's our advice.
Right.
Since we're really only concerned with levels and distances, there are other ways to do that, and that would be my honest advice. I mean, you can. I looked on eBay, didn't find anything there. You can't even buy. Like, I was like, could you just go to a store, buy an Onkyo, use the mic for a moment, and then return it to the store? But no, you can't, because you can't buy Onkyo in stores right now because they're all out of stock. I know they announced a couple new models for the new year at CES, but who knows if those will actually come. So honestly, my advice, Eric, is ignore it and just do it manually, because we wouldn't really use AccuEQ anyway.
I mean, you could. I mean, last ditch effort, I would go to like, and if I'm saying this, then you should really know that this is the last thing I would ever recommend. Go to like AVS forum and post someplace in there and say, listen, I've got explain your problem. Say, I just need to borrow somebody's mic. I just need to borrow it for like, an hour, and I'll bring it back to you. I just want to run this thing so I can be done with it. You could, I'll wear gloves and a mask the whole time. You put it in a Ziploc bag, it'll be fine. And then, I'm sure there's somebody out there who's got one. Just Jay.
Here we go.
That's his name, Just Jay.
Here it comes.
Oh,
this is the one I teased.
The time has come. Rob has avoided putting any references to this website on the topic list because anytime they get mentioned, good or bad, it just seems to lead to a flame war. But now they've posted reviews of some of our most commonly recommended speakers: Ascend, SVS, KEF, Focal, etc., and confusion abounds. So what's the deal with audiosciencereview.com? Well, it's full of science, Rob. It says it right there in the name. It's got science.
There's actually a very reasonable explanation for the name of their website. So, yeah.
So Amir is basically the sole reviewer there. He's got an electrical engineering background and has worked for major companies like Sony and Microsoft. He spent his own money to purchase some very expensive and impressive test equipment, and he relies heavily and primarily on Harman's research for setting his targets and scoring his measurements results against those. Audio Science Review is posted in the form of a forum, and Amir has forum partners who take his measurements, results, and then use Harman's research into preference curves and scores to create graphs and rankings for everything that is reviewed. There always seems to be some controversy. Some people say he has no idea what he's doing. Some people say the measurement results appear valid and accurate, but they do often go against the grain of common recommendations and opinion, so there's bound to be some pushback. Some people seem to follow the scores and rankings unquestioningly and defend a mirror to the death and the site to the death. That's never a good sign, by the way. In case you're wondering, no one defends me to the death. My wife would throw me under the bus if she thought I was wrong. Believe me.
I mean, I'm sure we have some weird fans of our own. I don't know how vocal they are.
If you are out there, I do not know who you are.
Gene over at Audioholics has fans like this. You know, anything Gene says, we'll just defend it. You know, right.
Don't do that. Don't do that with me or Rob. Don't do that. We just recently interviewed Todd Welty and they decided that we were going to change our subwoofer recommendations. Right. You know, I mean, we change our. Don't defend us to the death. We don't defend ourselves to the death. In the specific case of the Ascend Horizon with RAL, oh my God, this is going to be good, and the SVS Ultra bookshelf speakers, two examples that we've obviously recommended often here and described as accurate, tell it like it is speakers, most of their measured results do look good, and their preference scores and rankings were fairly high, but they pointed out a couple of key flaws, namely some higher than expected harmonic distortion, and not just in the bass, of the Ascend Horizon, and some irregularity in the off-axis response of the SVS Ultra bookshelf speakers. Lies! Burn that place down. I'm sorry.
We recommend
attack them, AV ranters.
Be true.
Dox him or whatever. Don't ever dox anybody.
Indeed.
Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. Bottom line, what's our take on audio science review and Amir's reviews? How important are these sorts of flaws, harmonic distortion in particular, and do these sorts of measurements have any bearing on our recommendations, since I've just now heard of the website? Simply put, would we change our opinion on something if we recommend if ASR, which is audio science reviews measurements, indicate there are problems? If you think that there is any speaker out there that won't have a measurement problem someplace in it, you have lost your mind. It does not exist. I mean, unless this guy, maybe is he measuring in an anechoic chamber?
Well,
is that what he's doing when he's doing that?
This is part of the whole thing. Yeah. So I mean, since Tom is not familiar, I'll take my say on this thing. I feel like I'm finally ready to publicly say something about it, because I knew as soon as this podcast mentions audio science review, even though our listenership is pretty small, somehow word is going to get out there, and we're going to get the people who defend the site to the death, and we're going to get the people who scream that nobody there has any idea what they're doing, and they're going to start fighting, and that's why comments are off on YouTube preemptively. But anyway, my opinion, when I saw some of the first things that were being done over at Audio Science Review, my opinion was, I don't trust this. This doesn't seem to line up with experience and reality. Over time, I actually think it's improved. And I actually give Amir quite a bit of credit. He has started to be a bit more public-facing, started his own YouTube channel, which, just based on what people are asking, has turned more into tutorials and explaining what he is doing. He did a pretty darn good interview with, it's a site called Stop the FOMO on YouTube, which has criticisms of its own. So it's kind of interesting to have these two people who get criticisms talking to each other, but being a bit more forward-facing. And overall, I think the biggest problem with audio science reviews that are posted on their forum is I don't think Amir is a particularly good communicator. Now, he's an engineer, and that is pretty common. There's a lot of engineers who their core strength is not communicating to a wide layman audience.
That's like the majority of engineers.
Sure, and I have no blame for that. However, they've begun this forum that's targeted at laymen, and that's something you've got to be good at, is communication. And it's not the sort of thing where it's like, I don't think the words are clear or whatever. It's communication style. And one of the biggest issues is, if I were to make a recommendation for someone who is new and not super knowledgeable and they want to gain knowledge, should you go to Audio Science Review? Should you trust their reviews implicitly? My advice would be, don't even look at the subjective part, the listening test part, which is very short at the very end. The shortest subjective listening tests you've ever seen in any review of anything ever. But he's got them in there. And I would say pretty much ignore that. And unfortunately, a lot of the explanation that is in the reviews themselves of the measurements. I'm like, it's incomplete. He's trying to simplify for an audience, but unfortunately it's incomplete and not giving you enough information to really understand. Now, is the information available elsewhere on the forum where he's written in the past about, all the things that he's doing? It is there, and there it's very dense and can become very difficult to understand. So the problem I have is that it's not all or nothing. The problem I have recommending it to someone who isn't already knowledgeable is that it can lead to this confusion. Because the measurements that he's taking, he's got this equipment, and it's an interesting, I'll focus on speaker reviews since that was the topic of the question. He's got this measurement rig, which is using a relatively new process, which is you do not have an anechoic chamber, but it is a motorized robot, essentially, that precisely moves the microphone around the speaker to do what they call the spinorama measurement, which is he takes like 800 or 1,000 measurement points all around in a sphere around the speaker. But then it does it again in a bigger speaker, and it has the ability to do it multiple times in ever-increasing sizes of speakers, increasing sizes of spheres around the speaker. And through some pretty sophisticated calculation, you can actually calculate out most of the room response by doing this, because it looks very closely at the specific phase. I mean, this becomes very important in the bass, but it looks very closely at that and does its best. It's not 100% perfect, but it calculates out pretty well the room response. So, I mean, he's like, oh, it's better than an anechoic chamber. I'm like, well, even the documentation says it's meant to be used in conjunction with an anechoic chamber for the very best results. But it's pretty sophisticated and it's pretty accurate. And if you kind of ignore everything below 200 hertz, it's very accurate in terms of the frequency response that's being plotted. And you get these wonderful off-axis response and polar responses and everything like that. So in that interview he did with Stop the FOMO, he gave a very good explanation. He's like, look, I am an engineer. I see these specs all the time in the engineering documents in the pro world, in pro audio. They have these measurements. He knows the companies have these measurements. They don't release these types of measurements to the public. And he says usually they say when he talks to the engineers of the companies that the marketing departments don't want us to put all of these measurements out there. It's just going to confuse people. And I mean, I see points all around. He's like, look, I know the measurements exist. Some of the esoteric speaker and electronics companies, they don't do the measurements, and he isn't in favor of that. He's like, so look, if they're either not going to do it or they're going to do it but not release it, I'm going to pay the money. I'm going to get the equipment in to do it myself. I'm going to release these out freely to the world, and now people have access to these types of measurements. I go, okay. And where Audio Science Review came from, he explains, he says, that actually came from, there's the Audio Engineering Society. We talked about that with Todd Welty. There is a paywall. It's not a high paywall, but there is a paywall. And he's like, some of the best research is there, but it's behind a paywall. So he said he started Audio Science Review and called it Audio Science Review to review the papers that were behind a paywall. That's where the name came. So it wasn't that it was scientific reviews of audio equipment. It was that it was audio science, and I'm reviewing the papers about audio science. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. And that's the domain that you came up with. So the problem that I have with Audio Science Review, not Amir specifically, is the forum. It's the people who go nuts on both directions, because you got the people like, I've listened to this speaker all my life and I think it sounds great, and your measurements say that it isn't a great speaker, and so you must have no idea what you're doing, and it will throw out everything that you've done. And there's the people like, nah, he's completely objective and scientific and it's perfect, and you don't know what you're listening to. I'm like, okay, useless on both sides. And unfortunately, those people spread out to every other forum in the world and every review online, and they have to start fighting about whether Amir is the second coming of Christ or whether he's the devil incarnate. And it's like, all of that is just noise, and it's completely useless. Okay, first of all, it is not science. It is measurement. Measurement is part of science. Science does not stop at measurement. Okay, that's the problem. And unfortunately, the explanation of where the name came from for the website is fine, but unfortunately, people are like, this is scientific review. It's not. He doesn't run the tests more than once. He writes in his reviews over and over, I had a problem with this particular measurement, but I didn't go back and do it. I just don't have time. He's a private person doing this on his own time with his own money. He's like, I didn't have time to redo it. I threw the measurements up there anyway, because if I don't, people are going to be like, where's this measurement? Like, that's really problematic. If you were turning this in as your term paper, and he knows this well being an engineer, you'd score a very low grade. All right. You can't do that and call it a well-written scientific paper. He isn't claiming that it is, all right? So, like, I've got defenses of Amir, I've got criticisms of Amir, but ultimately he's a private citizen putting out this information of his own time and his own money, admitting it isn't perfect, but then drawing subjective conclusions. And where I have a real honest criticism of what he writes himself is that it's amazing how his subjective conclusions never seem to contradict his measurements. But then he's like, yeah, this is cited, and I looked at the measurements first. I'm like, well, they're kind of useless. All right. There's huge confirmation bias going on, which is why I would say anybody who's not familiar, like, kind of ignore the subjective part at the end. It's very suspect and not terribly useful. So yeah, I think that I think the data that is there, first of all, it's data. It is not the be-all and end-all. He has taken research done by others, people we respect greatly, Floyd Toole, Sean Olive, Todd Welty himself. He's taken research that they've done. We have to look at what was that research designed to examine. Most of Harman's research is not about a single listener in a single 2-channel system. Most of Harman's research is about larger audiences, because what does Harman and JBL mostly do? Most of their money comes from the professional side of things, in full-size theaters, where full-range speakers and large audiences make sense. That's their bread and butter over there. Why are they focusing on a mono speaker instead of what it sounds like when you play this pair of speakers in stereo? Well, because they're trying to limit variables. And so it's like there's a ton of things where it's like, yeah, the data is data. It's not the be-all and end-all. I don't have very much criticism at all of the measurement system that he has. I would probably not put too much stock in the base part of the measurement. And unfortunately, now coming to the whole thing of the distortion includes the bass. And Amir will admit these are not perfect measurements. These are the measurements he has. That's fine. You are honestly reporting the data that you have. It does not mean you can draw conclusions. And one of the issues that you'll see if you look across most of his speaker reviews, any speaker that is ported has higher distortion. Why? Right. Because yes, it is resonating. And that's going to show up as distortion when you're taking the entire frequency range in a 360-degree sphere. You are going to see higher distortion numbers if you have a port. It's just going to happen. So, like I say, the problem is that the full explanation is not in every review. And if you're trying to talk to a layman audience, what do? Do you overwhelm them with information, or do you oversimplify it? And unfortunately, it's really hard to strike that balance. And like I say, I think if I have one criticism of Amir himself in what he's doing on the site, I don't think his greatest strength is communication. But I mean, look, is every man supposed to be everything to every field? I mean, so I've got a lot of defense and I've got some criticism. And at the end of the day, I wish I could say, you can follow everything that's said on the site, or you can ignore everything on the site. That'd be easy. It's not that easy. We're really into the middle here, and the data is just data, and it's not data you should completely ignore. It's also not data you should say, well, this is the be-all, end-all.
All right. So when I write reviews, and when it's, I've got some review speakers coming in pretty soon, as a matter of fact, and when I write reviews, what I always do is, first of all, if I can include measurements, I will include measurements. Most of the time, I don't include measurements because it just, like you said, it just opens up this massive can of worms. But when I do include measurements, because I'm not taking my stuff out to a field someplace. Right. That's not happening. I'm not doing that. So I'm not going to take my stuff out to a field someplace. I'm not going to do all that. So what I will do is do in-room measurements and just get like a 1 meter on axis, and then 15 degrees off axis and 30 degrees off axis response, and that's about it. Okay. And then just say, hey, it was in a room. The rooms back when I did those measurements, it was in my office, which was as dead as you can possibly get it. Pretty much, I had like 19 panels or 20 panels in a 4-inch thick panels with air gaps behind them, in an 11 by 10 foot room. They were on the ceiling, they were on the floors, they were in the corners, they were not the floors, the ceilings, walls, corners, everywhere. So it's about as dead as you can get it in a home. And I still made the caveat that this is in a room, so there's some room problems are going to be here. And I had my measurements reviewed by engineers. That being said, I always wrote the review before I took the measurements.
Right.
So I would write the review, write my subjective opinions, and then take the measurements, and then send the measurements off to be looked at by somebody who knew more about measurements than I do, because I am not an electrical engineer or a sound designer or any of that stuff. And invariably, and I do say invariably, I never come across a time when my subjective experiences didn't line up with the measurements I took. Now, of course, I'm taking in-room measurements, so that's completely different. But you're right, Rob. If you take the measurements first and then you listen to the speakers, there is no way not to be tainted.
He always says he listens to the speaker prior to taking any measurements, and tries to form his subjective opinion on that. But he doesn't write the review until after everything. And it's like one of the things.
You're only taking my word for that, though, right? I mean, you trust me. But no one else has to. No one else needs to. And that's why I say,
especially in his early reviews, and this is one of the other things, he references in his writing in my last review, somebody pointed out this, so I changed that a little bit in this measurement to try and get it more accurate or to calibrate it better or whatever. It's like it's a continuing, ongoing thing. But that old review still lives on the site. And like I say, I don't have a problem with what he's doing. I have a problem with the audience that is going nuts on both ends of it. Going, oh, look, he changed. And then people are like, well, of course he changed. That's science. And I'm like, it devolves into this really poor argument on either side of the spectrum. He's putting out data that's there. I don't think he would say, oh, yes, this is a completely, thoroughly researched, agonizingly, painstakingly error-corrected, peer-reviewed study. Nah, you're not making any of those claims. It's like, I've got this amount of time. I invested all this money in this equipment, but yeah, sometimes I need to recalibrate it, and I ran out of time to do it. These speakers got to go back where they came from. There's all this error. Does he mention a lot of those errors? Yes. Does he mention all of those errors? No. No, they're not all in there. It's incomplete. Like I say, if these were term papers being graded, they would get low grades. And I think he would admit that. So,
just like we continue to tell you about us, there's, we are going by what we know, our experiences, and what science that is either current or currently in our knowledge.
Yeah.
But you should always feel free to listen and then decide at the end, I don't agree.
Absolutely.
And I want my subwoofer to be a little bit louder or a little bit softer. Or to the person who says, your measurements say my speakers suck, but I'm listening to them and they sound good. It very well may be that they sound good in your room because of factors extraneous to the speakers themselves. So, you can both be right. And it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. We're going on because I want to answer a few more questions, and I have a son to take to track.
Just very quickly, the last thing on the SVS Ultra speakers, because Just Jay asked specifically about them. One thing I found interesting was the bang-on zero on-axis frequency response that Amir measured. It was it actually had a little bit of a tipped up high end and one little other rise and one little other dip. And then he was it was actually interesting because they didn't perfectly match the off axis, but if you put together the cumulative off axis and only ignore the on axis, suddenly it became really, really even and smooth everywhere else. I'm like, oh, so you mean these speakers are meant to be towed in, but not straight at your face? That's all it is.
Every other, every other speaker on the planet.
But that isn't explained. And then specifically because the Harman score heavily weights the direct 0 degree on axis, and he's scoring against that, which again is fine. That's his reference point. He discloses that. But then people look and they go, well, the score is lower. And it's like, oh, it's a lack of understanding a lot on the part of the audience there.
Yeah. All right. Infinite Gary. Gary has decided to buy Monoprice HTP-1, which I think he already did because he thanked them.
That's right. That's the surprise.
All of its 16 channel outputs are XLR connections, but some of the amplifiers he tends to use only have RCA inputs. He is assuming Monoprice's XLR-to-RCA adapters will do the trick? Question mark?
No.
I mean,
crazily enough, no, you don't actually want to buy the XLR to RCA adapters that Monoprice sells, even though it's the exact same website. Yeah, you need specific. They describe in the manual of the HTP-1 exactly how the pins. There are 3 pins in an XLR connector. You actually only need to connect 2 of them, but it has to be the right 2 of them, and that third one needs to be left disconnected. And so, weirdly enough, the ones that Monoprice sells are not wired that way, and you wouldn't actually want to use those. Emotiva's XLR to RCA adapters are wired exactly the way that's described in the HTP-1 manual. So funnily enough, you want to go to a different company. They're $8 each, so they're not wildly expensive, although I guess you need 16 of them, so it starts to add up.
Just another person to talk us up to there, Gary.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to put that in there, because anyone who might be looking, you do need to be a little bit careful with XLR to RCA adapters.
Andrew got a pair of monitor audio bookshelf speakers that can work well upstairs. So he has stolen his KEF LS50 speakers back from his wife, if you remember.
That's right.
Which I don't expect that you did, but there was a thing that happened there. So he's loving them. He's been using his NVIDIA Shield as a source for streaming music services, Tidal in particular. He's been reading about various streaming network players, and the Blue Sound Node 2i gets very positive reviews, although a lot of the praise is for its analog outputs. Could it be worth could it be worth it whatsoever to get the Node 2i and disconnect his Denon X3600H via and connect it to his Denon via analog instead of using his NVIDIA Shield? Can I say no hard enough? Do I need to scream it into my microphone?
Right.
I don't think I need to, do I? He knew the answer to that before he asked, but he was hoping that maybe I wouldn't say no.
Well, who knows? I mean, you know, I think the Node 2i got a pretty good score over at Audio Science Review for its analog outputs in terms of the cleanliness.
Don't flame war off.
Right. That's right.
Flame off. Okay, Human Torch over there.
I mean, Andrew, no, this is not where to spend your money. I don't have a huge problem with the Node 2i. It's just there's no improvement to be had. Let's see. NVIDIA Shield is one of the ones that can take Tidal in full lossless at greater than the high res files if you want to, so it can play it. So until there's like Amazon Music HD with Atmos, which I suspect will be available on an Amazon device before any other devices, there's no reason to change your playback device.
Yeah. This comes from Anonymous. Last episode, Dale asked for a gear list for 2.1 music setup and a separate 5.2.4 home theater setup. We both agree that you should get the Denon Marantz receiver for the home theater. But for the 2.1 music setup, Rob suggested a specific 2-channel Marantz plus a mini DSP with DRAC plus a selection of separate stereo or monoblock amps. Why? Given that a full surround sound receiver with room correction built in could actually cost less than the combined components that Rob recommended, are there genuine advantages for 2-channel listening with that setup, or are you just looking for the best sound quality? Or if you're just looking for the best sound quality, could a single AV receiver sound just as good, if not better? Yeah, I mean, I think that the 2.1 setup that Rob suggested was because when people want to buy 2.1, they want to buy that stuff.
That is entirely it. I am nodding my head vigorously for audio-only listeners.
Yeah, there is... Okay. I will tell you right now that there would have to be a very specific set of circumstances that would have to come together in order for me to buy anything other than a receiver for any number of channel listening system. 2-channel, 1-channel, 5-channel, 7-channel, 9-channel, I don't care what it is. If the only reason that I would buy something separate or different than a receiver is because the receiver would not play well almost certainly with the speakers. Sure. So if I got electrostatic speakers, then or something that had a huge power draw, or I was sitting very far away from normal speakers, or blah, 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 I would buy a receiver and an amp. But that's because I want the room correction. But if you're going to do that and you were already going to buy a receiver for your 5.2.4 system, maybe you want something a little unique for your 2-channel system. So you get the mini DSP. It gives you a little, it gives you something else to play with and that sort of thing. So I think Rob was tailoring that more to the listener based on what he thought the listener would like to buy, as well as what it would appeal to them, as well as what would work well. Many 2-channel systems, mini DSP would never factor into it. That's just not something they would do. Subwoofers would not factor into it. So it was sort of the straddling the line between wanting to have that little separate system for your 2.1 system, and also still being wanting to have the actual good sound, not just good sound because someone told you it was good in a high-end audio review.
Yes, we must remember that the question began by asking for a 2.1 setup with tubes. And that...
Yes, tubes. I forgot about the tubes part.
That was really the... I mean, I'm glad that Anonymous asked this question. So Anonymous, to answer directly, if I were to say, based purely on performance, and because we do care about value around here, but just purely on performance and value, I agree with Tom and I agree with you, I would just buy an AV receiver. I would go buy like, I'd want good room correction built in if at all possible. So like a Denon or Marantz with multi-Q XT32, which, about $1,000 you're looking at to get that, but that is less than the combined cost of what I recommended there, including the mini DSP and separate amplifier. But yeah, that's what I would go for. But when somebody comes and says, the starting point for them is every single device is a separate piece of equipment and they have tubes in it, my only move was to try and get them away from tubes. I'm like, you can still have the separates, you can still go a little bit nuts, you can still have fancy cables going between them if you want to. I would never recommend it, but when you're starting from, this is what I want, then yes, it was absolutely trying to tailor the question to what I assumed. I made a presumption, no question about it. There.
All right. No.
Indeed.
Nope.
Yeah, we've reached 2 hours. Dale's question.
Nope.
Speaking of Dale, but we've reached, it's a long question. So
yeah, Dale, another long question. Sorry, buddy. All right. So who do we have left?
We have Dale, and we have Ken and Christian. That's it.
All right.
Yeah, that's the list.
Not too bad. All right, if you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Kevin for going to www.avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 126 patrons over at patreon.com. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, Kevin.
Yes, indeed, Kevin. Thank you so much for the PayPal donation. Really do appreciate that. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anyone who might like to sign up for an automatic monthly donation. Thanks very much to our 126 patrons over there. Yeah, great.
We also want to thank Infinite Gary for talking us up to Monoprice for his big processor purchase, Dale for talking us up to Video Seku, and Mario for sending me some photos that I can use on AV gadgets. Thank you, guys.
Yes, indeed. Infinite Gary, thank you very much for the Monoprice. The vote of confidence, talking us up to them. Dale, thanks for talking us up to Video Seku. And Mario, thanks for giving Tom permission to use those photos on avgadgets.com. Check that site out, people, avgadgets.com. Tom is the editor-in-chief over there.
Yes. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.